Today we're comparing the Firstborn to the Primaris, with a comparison between the Tactical Marines and the Intercessors. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics for another unit comparison. Today we're looking at those Tactical Marines with their 2 wound profile against the Intercessors, who they are now very similar to. In the video we'll talk about their damage and durability, heavy and special weapons, transport options, and how they might fit into a few battlefield roles in your army. I've been quite looking forward to making this one, as I believe the decision is a lot closer than it ever was, so let's get straight into it. So the 2 Space Marine units have now become very similar in terms of profile now that Tactical Marines have gained the extra wound. Tactical Marines are now 18 points and Intercessors are 20. They now have the exact same defensive profile with 2 wounds at toughness 4, and basically for your 2 extra points, the Intercessors gain one of their 3 flavours of bolt rifle, all of which have their advantages over the standard bolter, and they also have +1 attack based on their profile. This does mean that if you keep the Tactical Marines cheap, then they'll have the same defensive profile if they have no upgrades, which means that point for point the Tactical Marines will be better in terms of durability. A 10 wounds Tactical squad will cost you 90 points, where a 10 wound Intercessor squad will cost you 100, and that is quite an advantage if you just want them to literally sit on an objective and you're not really too bothered about their damage output. If you are wanting them to deal damage to the enemy in close combat or at range though, then the Intercessors do have a massive advantage. Even if we ignore the other 2 bolt rifles and only focus on the auto bolt rifle, this one puts out 3 strength 4 shots at 24 inches, compared with the Tactical Marines only putting out 2, and that's assuming that they stay stationary to benefit from bolter discipline. Basically the auto bolt rifle Intercessors just directly outcompete the Tactical Marines, only 2 extra points for plus 50% shots, and also being able to move and fire a lot more freely just really puts them ahead. I'm not necessarily saying that auto bolt rifle Intercessors are the best choice either. If you'd prefer to have the Stalker or the standard bolt rifle over them, then it stands to reason that they're only gaining further over the Tactical Marines. The same is very true in melee. For your basic guy, the standard Tactical Marine is going to be getting 2 attacks on the charge with Shock Assault, whereas Intercessors are going to be getting 3, and again that's plus 50% better in terms of their damage output. Overall, if you're not doing any upgrades or fancy things with the Tactical Marines, they're very slightly more durable, but significantly less damaging in terms of killing the enemy. Just for an objective camping squad, I thought it might be interesting to run some numbers if we gave our Tactical Marines a heavy bolter. I thought that could be quite a relevant comparison, seeing as it's quite a cheap upgrade, and it puts them at the exact same cost as an Intercessor squad. Interestingly enough, and provided the Tactical Marines do remain stationary, they actually do compete very well with the Intercessors. Slightly behind those auto bolt rifles when shooting hordes, but about the same as standard ones and far better than Stalkers. They're actually some of the best choices if you're firing at Intercessors or Aggressors. That heavy bolter profile really is quite efficient against Space Marines now, and they're pretty much on par with the rest when they're shooting at vehicles. The Stalker bolt rifles are a bit better, and the other 2 are slightly worse. Overall, if you're just looking for an objective camping squad that's not moving, a squad of Tactical Marines with a heavy bolter does compete pretty well with the Intercessors. Again, I'm not necessarily saying that the heavy bolter is definitely the best choice. I'd be very tempted to give them a las cannon for an extra 5 points, so they could chip in with a bit of anti-tank duty, and the bolters might be able to fire at any infantry getting close. Next, let's briefly talk about transport vehicles, which I think is quite relevant in 9th edition, where you do want to be piling forwards onto objectives. I wouldn't usually bother giving the Intercessors a repulsor, instead I'd go for an impulsor. This guy's at 110 points before upgrades, it's slightly faster than a Rhino, and you can further give it a shield dome or iron hail heavy stubber if you want to augment it further. I think the best advantage for the Intercessors using the impulsor is the fact that it gets that assault vehicle special rule, the one that allows it to move very far and then have the Intercessors jump out straight after, even if they can't assault. This means that they really can get pretty fantastically far forward to take objectives, and you might have a decent chance of stealing objectives out under the enemy's nose, as of course those Intercessors have objectives secured. It could compare a bit better with a Rhino, where of course you can't get out after the transporter's moved, so if an enemy is still on an objective, you might not be able to steal it out from under them. It does also have the very nice effect of allowing the Intercessors of being able to deal damage with their bolt guns as well, which kind of only adds to the value in my mind. The Tactical Marines have a few more viable options in my opinion. Firstly, while the Rhino does have its downsides, it is incredibly cheap and really durable point per point. An 80 point Rhino with a 90 point Tactical Marine squad inside is only 170 points, and that provides you with a really significant amount of Space Marine wounds to park on an objective, and the opponent's really not going to want to shoot at them first, as they're just not that much of an offensive threat and priority target. It's quite interesting that you could also put a full squad of Tactical Marines in here, so a full 10 of them in a Rhino, rather than just being limited to 6 in a Razorback or Impulsor. I would kind of see the Razorback as a potential optional upgrade for the Rhino, Do you want to pay an extra 30 points for dual heavy bolters, or a little bit more still for twin assault cannons or twin las cannons? Even with all this extra firepower, it still costs fairly similar to an impulsor, so you really are trading out that very nice assault vehicle rule for some seriously heavy guns. Both the Rhino and the Razorback have hunter-killer missiles and storm bolters if you want to bolt them on, and I think both of which are pretty reasonable choices, particularly with hunter-killers being strength 10 now. Finally, you could put the Tactical Marines in a drop pod, which isn't necessarily a bad idea, but I'd be tempted to put something else in there instead. Drop pods do cost 70 points and are a bit of a premium upgrade, so I'd be a lot more tempted to put down a bunch of Stern Guard, or maybe a bunch of Devastators armed with heavy weapons, so you actually deploy some serious firepower for the premium that you're investing. I would also mention that the transports make the special weapons and combi weapons more viable. I don't think that you'd be wanting to put plasma guns or melter guns on objective camping squads, but by getting them up the field very quickly, you give them a far better chance of being used, so things like combi melters or combi plasmas just become a lot more viable. So overall, Intercessors have generally better basic damage, both at ranged and in melee, provided the Tactical Marines aren't packing heavy weapons, and they've got access to the excellent Impulsor. The Intercessors really clean up on Stratagems, with two really solid options in Transhuman Physiology and Rapid Fire. With Transhuman only being 1 command point for 5 models or less, you could really help an objective securing squad to hang on to claim that point, and Rapid Fire kind of speaks for itself. Doubling the squad's damage output for 2 command points can give you an extra burst of bolter fire when you need it. You do also have the option of Gene-wrought Might for a little bit of extra close combat damage, although I don't think it's quite as efficient as the others. In terms of chapter choice, I'd be a bit more tempted to take Intercessors over Tactical Marines if I was playing White Scars or Imperial Fists. White Scars do a bit better in melee, so the better melee profile of the Intercessors will do better for them, and also if you take the Auto Bolt Rifle Intercessors, then you can have the very nice combo of moving and advancing, firing off those Auto Bolters, and then still charging into close combat to deal even more damage. Imperial Fists, I think, just synergize better with a squad that's going to put out a lot more bolter fire. There's more value in buffing the very decent bolters of the Intercessors than the slightly more weedy ones of the Tactical Marines, and I think that other melee chapters such as Blood Angels are going to get more out of that extra attack than having Tactical Marines with just one. Black Templars and Space Wolves are a bit more complicated, as they both have their own unique, more melee-orientated troops choices. One final advantage for the Intercessors is that being in the new Primaris range is that they're a bit less likely to be phased out in the future. I don't think it's particularly likely to happen anytime soon, but at some point I suspect it's going to get harder to field Firstborn Marines than it will be Primaris. I'd say their main advantages are better basic durability and better flexibility with their options for heavies, specials and combi weapons. Out of these, I think that the heavy weapons are generally the most efficient. I particularly like the las cannon for objective camping squads, and the multi-melters are a really interesting option just because of its raw power. You might also have the option of using some of their unique stratagems, such as Hellfire shells for heavy bolters, or flak missiles for missile launchers. We've already gone over their transports. In particular, I think the cheap rhinos are looking quite nice. And in terms of chapters that might favour the Tactical Marines a bit, I think that ones such as Master Artisans or Salamanders, where you get 1 reroll per attack, could be really good with a tactical squad with a heavy weapon. Las cannons are going to be a lot more damaging with a wound reroll, and even more so for multi-melters, particularly in Salamanders, as they might also get +1 to wound. Finally, in terms of actually buying the kits, you do get a few more models and points per pound or dollar, so Tactical Marines might be a bit more of a cost-efficient way to build up an army. So let's put it all together then and talk about a couple of battlefield roles for the units. First up, I think for backfield objective securing, I think that either squad can work very well. You can do it cheapest for 90 points worth of Tactical Marines, which certainly has its advantage at being the cheapest way that you can secure an objectives with a troops choice in the new Codex Space Marines. Typically though, I think the extra 2 points per model is generally going to be worth it to upgrade to either Bolt Rifle or Stalker Bolt Rifle Intercessors. I think the increasing amount of damage that you get out of these guys is going to do you better than just having 90 points of Tactical Marines, unless you literally are just wanting them for the durability and maybe even just to hide out of line of sight and stay safe. I think that the two options are really well balanced for damage dealing when you consider the tactical squad with a heavy weapon. Honestly, I could happily use either Bolt Rifle or Stalker Bolt Rifle Intercessors, or a tactical squad with a las cannon or heavy bolter. They both have decent advantages for damage dealing when they're standing still capturing an objective. You could also consider heavy Intercessors for this role as well. We talked about them in another video comparing them to Intercessors. They do put out a little bit less damage, but they're incredibly durable and annoying to shift, though you will be paying a bit more of a premium for them as their smallest squad comes in at 140 points. It is just a little bit questionable in my mind as to whether or not you want that big a unit just sat around on a home field objective. Moving on, if you want a squad that's pushing forward and marching on foot up to midfield objectives, I would use Intercessors over Tactical Marines. By putting them into the midfield, you're just going to have a lot more chance that you're going to be able to bring those bolt shots to bear, and there's a lot more chance of close combat as well, so the extra attack's going to be a lot more meaningful. Also, if you are using some 10-man strong squads, then you could deal some serious damage with rapid fire, potentially getting anything up to an extra 30 bolter shots downrange for 2 command points if you're using the auto bolt rifle. I just don't think the Tactical Marines compete very well here, and the extra 2 points is well worth it for just being so much more of a threat. Finally, in terms of transport vehicles heading towards objectives, I think that either can work again, though I suspect that the more competitive choice will likely be the Intercessors in an Impulsor. You certainly do pay a premium for that assault vehicle special rule to have them jump out after they've moved and jump onto an objective, but I think it really could be a price worth paying for getting objective secured units so far into the midfield straight away, and also it does allow you to use all of your bolters right from that same turn rather than having to wait a turn to pile out. While I do think that they're slightly better, as I said before, I think that a cheap Rhino with a Tactical Marine squad does have its value. An Impulsor with an Intercessor squad inside will cost you 210 points, whereas the Tactical Marines in a Rhino will cost you 170 for almost the exact same amount of durability, and durability is very useful in 9th. You then could spend up to 40 points to get various different damage upgrades, such as hunter-killer missiles, razorback guns, or special weapons, and that could potentially give you a more threatening squad than the Intercessors, even if you don't have that assault vehicle special rule. Overall, I think comparing just one unit to a unit in terms of base stats, I think that the Intercessors are stronger, plus 2 points for extra damage dealing both at range and in melee is pretty reasonable, and they're backed up with some excellent stratagems as well. However, I do think that Tactical Marines can edge them out in certain roles. Say if you have an army that wants some objective campers and also a little bit of ranged anti-tank, the Tactical Marines are really a good choice for that, or if you literally just want to take some of the toughest Space Marines that you can point for point, either basic squads of Tactical Marines or Tactical Marines and Rhinos are both really solid. So let me know which you prefer the idea of with the new rules in 9th edition. Do the Firstborn or the Primaris win for your chapter? Please let me know down in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics for plenty more coming like this. I'm certainly looking forward to looking over more of the Space Marine Codex in the coming weeks and months. If you've been watching a lot of my videos lately and you'd like to help support the channel, I'd just like to mention that I do have a Patreon page which you can find down in the video description. Making all of this YouTube content does take quite a bit of time, so if you are enjoying regularly, then any support is massively appreciated. Channel Patrons get to see a video early each week, there's regular votes to see what sort of things come next for the channel, and you also get automatically entered into the Auspex Tactics prize giveaway with a chance to win some big kits every single month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support the channel, then the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.